The rain came down like bullets that evening in Seattle. Robert stood under the covered entrance of the Grand Pacific Hotel, checking his watch for the third time in 2 minutes. His driver was late and he hated waiting. He had a dinner meeting across town in 40 minutes, and traffic would be a nightmare in this weather. He pulled out his phone, about to call his assistant, when something caught his eye. Across the street, sitting on a worn wooden bench, was a woman. She wasn't rushing to find shelter like everyone else. She just sat there, completely soaked, her head buried in her hands. Her shoulders moved up and down in a way that made it clear she was crying. Robert looked away. It wasn't his business. People had problems. That's just how life worked. He went back to his phone, scrolling through emails he'd already read twice, but something made him look up again. The woman was still there, and now he could see a small child sleeping against her side. The little girl couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 years old. She wore a pink jacket that had seen better days, and she clutched a stuffed animal that might have been a rabbit once, though it was hard to tell anymore. The child's lips looked almost blue in the dim streetlight. People walked past them. Dozens of people with umbrellas, rushing to get somewhere dry and warm. Nobody stopped. Nobody even slowed down. It was as if the woman and her daughter were invisible. Robert felt something twist in his chest. He told himself to ignore it. He had a company to run, meetings to attend, a life that didn't include getting involved with strangers on street corners. But his feet didn't seem to care what his brain was telling them. Before he knew it, he'd grabbed his umbrella from the doorman and was crossing the street. The rain was even louder out here, pounding against his umbrella like it was angry at the world. He reached the bench and stood there awkwardly for a moment, suddenly unsure what to say. The woman hadn't noticed him yet. She was lost in whatever pain was eating at her. "Excuse me," he said, feeling stupid the moment the words left his mouth. "Are you okay?" She looked up, startled. Her face was young, maybe early 30s, but there was an exhaustion in her eyes that made her seem much older. Mascara had run down her cheeks in dark streams. She quickly wiped at her face with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself. "I'm fine," she said automatically, the way people do when they're anything but fine. "We're fine. Just waiting for the rain to stop." Robert glanced at the sky. The weather report had said this storm would last all night. He looked back at her daughter, who stirred slightly but didn't wake up. The child was shivering. "Look, I don't mean to intrude, but your daughter looks cold. Can I give you a ride somewhere? Or buy you both something warm to eat?" The woman stiffened. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion, and Robert realized how this must look. Rich man in an expensive suit approaching a vulnerable woman and child. He took a step back, holding up one hand. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. You looked like you needed help." She studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether he was genuine or just another person who would let her down. Finally, she shook her head. "We don't need anything. Thank you." The words were polite but firm. Robert nodded, respecting her boundary. He turned to walk away, his conscience clear. He'd tried. That was more than most people would do. He'd made it 3 steps when he heard her voice again. So quiet he almost missed it under the sound of the rain. "My daughter needs medicine." Robert stopped and turned back. The woman was looking down at her child, one hand gently stroking the girl's wet hair. "She has asthma," the woman continued, her voice breaking. "Bad asthma. I was supposed to pick up her prescription today, but I didn't have enough money. I was short by $18. $18, and they wouldn't give it to me. I asked if I could pay the rest tomorrow, but they said no. It's policy, they said." Fresh tears started rolling down her cheeks, and this time she didn't try to hide them. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't be telling you this. You don't know us. It's not your problem." Robert felt that twist in his chest again, only stronger this time. $18. He'd spent more than that on his coffee this morning. He'd spent 100 times that amount on the tie he was wearing without thinking twice about it. "Which pharmacy?" he asked Dot. She looked up at him, confused. "What? Which pharmacy has the prescription?" "I'll pay for it." "No." She shook her head quickly. No, I can't let you do that. I don't even know you. My name is Robert, he said, crouching down so he was at her eye level. And I'm not trying to be a hero or make myself feel good. I'm just someone who can help, and you're someone who needs help. That's all this is. Please, let me get the medicine for your daughter. The woman stared at him, and he could see the war happening behind her eyes. Pride fighting against desperation. The need to protect her dignity wrestling with the need to protect her child. Robert understood that look. He'd seen it in his own mother's eyes more times than he could count, back when they'd had nothing. There's no strings attached, he added softly. I promise. Something in his voice must have convinced her, because she finally nodded. Her shoulders sagged as if a weight had been lifted, even though Robert suspected the real weight she carried was far heavier than one unpaid prescription. It's at the Walgreens on 5th Street, she said, under the name Lisa Chun. Lisa? Robert repeated, committing it to memory. He stood up and pulled out his wallet, handing her a $50 bill. Take this too? Get yourself something warm to eat while I'm gone. Please. Lisa stared at the money in her hand like it might disappear if she blinked. I can't. This is too much. It's a meal, Robert said. Nothing more. There's a diner 2 blocks that way. They have good soup, I've heard. Take your daughter there, get out of this rain, and I'll meet you with the medicine in 30 minutes. He didn't wait for her to argue. He was already dialing his driver, telling him to forget the dinner meeting and take him to Walgreens instead. As the car pulled up, Robert looked back one more time. Lisa was still sitting on that bench, staring at the money in her hand. Her daughter sleeping against her shoulder. Something about that image burned itself into Robert's mind. Later, he wouldn't be able to explain why he cared so much about 2 strangers on a rainy street. Maybe it was because he'd been that child once, watching his mother struggle and cry when she thought he was asleep. Maybe it was because he'd spent so long building his empire that he'd forgotten what it felt like to have nothing, or maybe it was simply because, for once in his carefully controlled life, he'd actually stopped long enough to see someone who needed to be seen. The car door closed, and they pulled away into the rain-soaked night. Robert didn't know it yet, but that moment on the bench would change everything. Not just for Lisa and her daughter, but for him too. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness start the biggest transformations. And sometimes a stranger's tears in the rain can teach a successful man what he'd forgotten about being human. 20-5 minutes later, Robert walked into the small diner on 5th Street with a white pharmacy bag in his hand. He spotted Lisa immediately. She and her daughter were sitting in a corner booth, the farthest one from the door. The little girl was awake now, slowly eating French fries while her mother watched her with eyes that hadn't stopped worrying. Lisa saw him and stood up halfway, like she wasn't sure if she should greet him or run. Robert raised the bag slightly and offered a small smile. She sat back down, visibly relieved. Thank you, she said as he approached. Her voice was steadier now, but still carried that edge of disbelief. You actually came back? Of course I did, Robert said, sliding into the booth across from them. He handed her the bag. The pharmacist said to give her 1 puff twice a day, and if she has trouble breathing at night, you can give her an extra dose. Lisa opened the bag with shaking hands and pulled out the small inhaler. She stared at it for a moment, then pressed it against her chest like it was made of gold. Thank you, she whispered again. You have no idea what this means. Her daughter looked up at Robert with curious brown eyes. She had sauce on her chin and that fearless way that only small children have with strangers. Who are you? The little girl asked. Sophie, that's rude, Lisa said quickly, but Robert laughed. It's okay. I'm Robert. What's your name? Sophie, the girl said proudly. On 4 3/4. That's almost 5. That's pretty old, Robert agreed seriously. I bet you'll be in kindergarten soon. Sophie nodded enthusiastically and went back to her French fries. Robert watched her for a moment, then looked at Lisa. In the warm light of the diner, he could see her face more clearly. She had the kind of features that would have been striking if exhaustion hadn't dulled them. But it was her hands he noticed most. They were raw and red, the hands of someone who worked hard at jobs that didn't require gloves. "Have you eaten?" he asked. Lisa shook her head. "I ordered her food." That was enough. Without asking, Robert flagged down the waitress and ordered soup and a sandwich. Lisa started to protest, but he held up his hand. "Please. You can't take care of her if you don't take care of yourself." Lisa's resistance crumbled. She nodded and looked down at the table. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind of awkward quiet that happens between strangers who've suddenly been thrust into intimacy by circumstance. "Why are you doing this?" Lisa finally asked. "Nobody just helps like this, not without wanting something." It was a fair question, and Robert had been asking himself the same thing for the past half hour. He leaned back against the worn vinyl of the booth and considered how to answer. "My mother raised me alone," he said. "My father left when I was 6, just walked out one day and never came back. My mom worked 3 jobs to keep us fed and in school. I remember nights when she'd tell me she wasn't hungry, that she'd eaten at work. I believed her for years. It wasn't until I was older that I realized she was going without so I could have seconds." Lisa's eyes softened with understanding. She knew that kind of sacrifice. She worked herself into an early grave. Robert continued, his voice quieter now. "And I was so busy building my business, making money, proving I could be successful, that I didn't see how bad things had gotten for her. By the time I realized it was too late." He stopped, surprised at himself. He never talked about this. Not with business partners, not with the few friends he had, not even with the therapist his assistant had convinced him to see twice before he quit. But something about this woman and her daughter in this plain little diner made the words come out. "So when I saw you on that bench," he said, "I saw her. And I thought maybe if I helped you, it would somehow make up for all the times I didn't help her when I should have." Lisa reached across the table and put her hand on his. It was a simple gesture, but it carried more weight than any business deal Robert had ever closed. "I'm sure your mother was proud of you," she said. Robert wanted to believe that. He really did. The waitress brought Lisa's food, and she ate slowly, like someone who hadn't had a proper meal in days. Robert ordered coffee he didn't want just to have something to do with his hands. Sophie fell asleep against her mother's side, the exhaustion of the day finally catching up with her. "Can I ask what happened?" Robert said. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to." Lisa was quiet for so long that Robert thought she wouldn't answer. Then she took a deep breath and started talking. "I was a nurse," she began. "A good one. I worked at Seattle General for 7 years. I had a nice apartment, a reliable car, money and savings. I was one of those people who had their life together, you know. I judged people who didn't. I thought they just weren't trying hard enough." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Then my husband got sick, cancer, the aggressive kind that moves fast and doesn't care how young you are, or how many plans you had. He was 32. Robert listened without interrupting, sensing that she needed to let this out. The bills came fast, really fast. Even with my insurance from the hospital, even with his from his teaching job, it wasn't enough. Cancer is expensive. The treatments, the experimental drugs, the home care when he got too weak to go to the hospital. We sold everything. The car, the furniture, my engagement ring. We borrowed from family who didn't have much to give. We maxed out every credit card we could get." Her voice was steady now, like she was reading from a script she'd memorized through repetition. "He fought for 2 years? 2 long, painful years where I watched the man I loved disappear, piece by piece. And then he was gone, and I was left with Sophie, who was just a baby, and debt that reached 6 figures. Medical debt that just kept growing even after he died because they kept sending bills for treatments he'd already received." She paused to wipe her eyes with a napkin. "I tried to keep working, but I couldn't afford childcare, and I didn't have family nearby who could help. I was calling out sick too much, missing shifts. I was grieving, exhausted, barely functioning. They were patient at first, but eventually they had to let me go. I lost my nursing license 6 months later when I couldn't pay the renewal fees." Robert felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd had no idea that life could unravel so completely, so quickly. "I found cash jobs where I could. Cleaning offices at night, waitressing at places that don't ask too many questions. But rent in Seattle is insane, and with my credit destroyed from the medical bills, nobody would rent to me anyway. We got evicted 4 months ago. Since then, we've been living in my car when we're lucky, shelters when we can get a spot. She looked down at Sophie, sleeping peacefully against her side. I keep her fed, I keep her clean. She doesn't know we're homeless. She thinks we're on an adventure, camping in the car. But tonight, when I couldn't afford her medicine, I realized I was failing at the one thing that mattered most. Keeping her safe, the diner felt too small suddenly, too warm. Robert's expensive suit felt like a costume, ridiculous and obscene in the face of what this woman had endured. You're not failing, he said firmly. You're surviving. That takes more strength than most people have. Lisa shook her head. You don't understand? Every day feels like I'm drowning. Every single day, and I'm so tired of fighting. So tired of being strong. Sometimes I just want to give up. But you don't, Robert pointed out. You could have given up months ago, but you're still here. Still fighting. That counts for something. Lisa looked at him with eyes that had seen too much, lost too much. Does it? Because from where I'm sitting, fighting just means suffering longer. Robert didn't have an answer for that. What could he say? That it would get better, that things would work out. Those were easy words from someone who'd never stood where she was standing. Instead, he made a decision that would change both their lives. I have an empty apartment, he said. It's nothing fancy, just a corporate unit my company keeps for out-of-town clients. Nobody's using it right now, stay there. Just for a while until you can figure things out. Lisa's eyes widened. I can't do that. Yes, you can. And you will. For Sophie, he'd used the right leverage, and he knew it. Lisa would refuse help for herself, but not for her daughter. Never for her daughter. She looked at Sophie, then back. At Robert, and he saw the exact moment when her pride lost the battle with her desperation. The apartment was on the 8th floor of a building in Queen Anne, with windows that looked out over the city. Lisa stood in the doorway, afraid to step inside, like crossing that threshold would make her wake up from a dream. It's okay, Robert said gently, carrying the sleeping Sophie in his arms. Go ahead, Lisa walked in slowly. The place was furnished simply but nicely, a couch that looked actually comfortable. A real bed in the bedroom, not a cot or a car seat. A kitchen with a refrigerator that hummed softly. She turned on the faucet in the bathroom and watched clean water flow out. Something that simple almost made her cry again. There's a washer and dryer in that closet, Robert said, pointing. I'll have someone bring groceries tomorrow. Basic stuff. Whatever you need. I don't know what to say, Lisa whispered, running. Her hand along the kitchen counter like she couldn't believe it was real. You don't have to say anything. Just rest. Take care of Sophie. That's enough. Robert laid the little girl on the bed and covered her with a blanket. Then he wrote his phone number on a piece of paper and left it on the counter. Call me if you need anything. I mean it, anything at all? After he left, Lisa stood in the middle of the living room for a long time. She was terrified. Terrified that this was too good to be true. Terrified that there would be a catch. Terrified that she was making a mistake trusting a stranger. But more than anything, she was just so deeply, completely exhausted that she couldn't think straight anymore. She locked the door, checked it twice, then crawled into bed next to Sophie without even taking off her damp clothes. For the first time in months, she fell asleep without fear of being woken up by someone knocking on her car window. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Robert kept his distance, which Lisa appreciated. He didn't show up unannounced or make her feel like she owed him anything. His assistant, an efficient woman named Patricia, dropped off groceries every few days and asked if Lisa needed anything else. Lisa always said no, even when the answer was yes. She spent those first weeks just trying to breathe again. She took Sophie to the park. They watched movies on the TV. She cooked real meals in the kitchen, still amazed every time she opened the refrigerator and found it full. At night, after Sophie fell asleep, Lisa would sit by the window and watch the city lights, wondering when the other shoe would drop. Robert called once a week to check in. The conversations were short, polite. He'd ask if everything was working okay in the apartment. She'd thank him again. He'd remind her that she didn't need to thank him. Then they'd hang up, both feeling awkward about the strange arrangement they'd created. But after the third week, Robert called with a different kind of question. "I've been thinking," he said. "You mentioned you lost your nursing license because you couldn't pay the renewal fees. What if we looked into getting it back?" Lisa's first instinct was to refuse. "That's complicated. There's paperwork, fees, continuing education credits I don't have. It's not that simple." "Nothing worth doing is simple," Robert said. "I have a lawyer who handles this kind of thing." "Would you be willing to talk to her? Just talk. No commitment." Lisa wanted to say no. Wanted to keep her head down and not ask for more than she'd already been given. But Sophie was starting to ask questions about when they'd have their own place, their own life again. And living in Robert's apartment, as nice as it was, wasn't a real solution. It was just a pause. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll talk to her." The lawyer's name was Helen, and she was nothing like Lisa expected. No fancy suit or cold demeanor. Just a tired-looking woman in her 50s who listened without judgment and took notes in a beaten-up notebook. "This is fixable," Helen said after Lisa explained her situation. "It won't be quick, and there's going to be bureaucracy, but we can get your license reinstated. The medical debt is trickier, but there are programs, ways to negotiate. You're not the first person this has happened to." Something about hearing those words, that she wasn't the first, made Lisa feel less alone. She'd spent so long thinking she was the only one who'd failed this badly. Over the next month, Helen worked magic that Lisa didn't fully understand. Forms were filed. Calls were made. Lisa attended an online continuing education course that Helen's office paid for. Slowly, impossibly, the pieces started falling into place. Robert still kept his distance, but Lisa found herself wanting to talk to him. To tell him about Sophie's first day at the free preschool program Helen had found. To share that she'd actually laughed at something on TV the other night, really laughed, for the first time in years. Small things that probably didn't matter to him but felt enormous to her. One evening, she called him. Not because she needed something, but because she wanted to. "Is everything okay?" he asked immediately, concern in his voice. "Everything's fine," she said. "I just wanted to ask if you'd like to come for dinner sometime." "Nothing fancy. Just spaghetti or something?" "I want to thank you properly." There was a pause on the other end. "You don't need to thank me." "I know I don't need to." "I want to, please?" Another pause. "Okay, when?" "Tomorrow? 7 o'clock? I'll be there." Lisa spent the entire next day cleaning an apartment that was already clean and cooking a meal that was far more elaborate than spaghetti. Sophie picked flowers from the building's courtyard and arranged them in a plastic cup as a centerpiece. By 6:30, Lisa was a nervous wreck. Robert arrived exactly at 7, holding a bottle of wine he'd clearly spent too much money on. Sophie ran to the door to greet him like he was an old friend. "Robert, Mommy made lasagna and garlic bread. And I helped." "Did you?" Robert said seriously. "Then it must be the best lasagna in Seattle." They sat around the small dining table, and it felt almost normal. Almost like they were just friends sharing a meal. Sophie told Robert about preschool, about the other kids, about how she could write her name now. Robert listened like it was the most important information he'd ever heard. After Sophie went to bed, Lisa and Robert sat on the couch with coffee. The conversation flowed easier than it had before, like they'd crossed some invisible line from strangers into something else. "I need to tell you something," Robert said eventually. "About my mother." Lisa turned to face him, sensing this was important. "She didn't just work herself to death," he continued, staring at his coffee. "She was homeless when she died. I didn't know. I was in London, closing a business deal worth millions, and I didn't know my mother was sleeping in a shelter across town." His voice cracked, and Lisa saw the guilt he'd been carrying. "She called me that week. 3 times. I was busy. I told myself I'd call her back when I had time, but I didn't. And then I got a call from a hospital telling me she'd died of pneumonia. Complications from being on the street too long. They found my number in her things." "Robert," Lisa said softly, but he kept going. I made it to her funeral, but she was already gone. I never got to tell her I was sorry. Never got to help her when she needed it most. I have all this money, all this success, and I couldn't save the one person who actually mattered. Lisa reached over and took his hand. You were hurt too. Your father left. You were just trying to survive in your own way. That's not an excuse. No, Lisa agreed. But it's a reason. And reasons matter. They sat in silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts about the people they'd lost and the guilt they carried. When I saw you on that bench, Robert said quietly, I saw her. I saw my mother, and I thought maybe this was my chance to do better. To not walk away when someone needed help. You didn't help me because of her, Lisa said, understanding flooding through her. You helped me for her, Robert nodded, unable to speak. Then I'm glad, Lisa said. I'm glad you stopped that night. I'm glad you didn't walk away. Because you saved us, Robert. You actually saved us? But even as she said the words, Lisa felt a knot of worry in her stomach. Things were going too well. Life had taught her that when things went well, something bad was usually waiting around the corner. She just didn't know what form it would take. She found out 2 days later, when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. The voice on the other end identified himself as a reporter from the Seattle Times. I'm doing a story about Robert Chen and his philanthropic activities, the man said in a tone that suggested his story was about anything but philanthropy. I understand you've been living in one of his properties. I was hoping you could answer a few questions about the nature of your relationship. Lisa's blood went cold. I don't know what you're talking about. Miss Chun, we have photographs of you and Mr. Chun together. Of him carrying your daughter. We just want your side of the story. Lisa hung up. Her hands were shaking so badly she dropped the phone. In that moment, she knew the good dream was over, and the nightmare was about to begin again. Lisa called Robert immediately, her voice shaking so hard she could barely get the words out. He told her to stay calm, that he'd be right over. He arrived 20 minutes later, his face tight with worry. What exactly did the reporter say? He asked, sitting across from her at the kitchen table. Lisa repeated the conversation word for word. She'd replayed it in her head so many times that it was burned into her memory. Robert's jaw clenched harder with each sentence. This is my fault, he said. I should have known this could happen. I should have been more careful. What are they trying to say? Lisa asked, even though part of her already knew the answer. Robert looked at her directly. They're going to make it look like something it's not. Like I took advantage of you. Or like you're using me. Either way, they'll twist it into something ugly. Lisa felt sick. She'd been so focused on just surviving, on taking care of Sophie, that she hadn't thought about how this might look to the outside world. A billionaire and a homeless woman. Of course people would think the worst. I'll leave, she said suddenly. Today I'll pack our things and go. That way there's no story. No. Robert's voice was firm. Running won't make this go away. They already have photos. They already have the narrative they want. Leaving now just makes you look guilty of something you didn't do? Then what do we do? Robert was quiet for a moment, thinking. We tell the truth. Before they can twist it. Nobody will believe the truth, Lisa said bitterly. The truth sounds made up, maybe, but it's all we have. The article came out 3 days later. It was worse than Lisa had imagined. The headline read, Tech Billionaire's Secret Arrangement with Homeless Single Mother. The photos showed Robert carrying Sophie into the building, Lisa and Robert at the diner, him visiting the apartment. Innocent moments made to look suspicious. The article didn't directly accuse them of anything illegal, but it didn't have to. The implications were clear. It questioned Robert's judgment. It suggested Lisa was taking advantage of his kindness. It painted Sophie as a prop in some twisted game. The comments section was even worse. People Lisa had never met were saying horrible things about her parenting, about her character. Lisa's phone exploded with messages. Numbers she didn't recognize. Emails from reporters asking for interviews. Someone had found her social media from years ago and was sharing old photos, picking apart everything about her. The clinic where she'd just been offered a job called to say they needed to postpone her start date. While they looked into the situation, she stopped going outside, stopped answering her phone. She pulled Sophie out of preschool because she was terrified someone would recognize them, say something cruel in front of her daughter. Sophie didn't understand why their adventure had suddenly ended, why they were trapped inside again. Robert faced his own storm. His board of directors called an emergency meeting. Investors were asking questions. His company's stock dropped 2 points in one day. His assistant Patricia warned him that this could seriously damage everything he'd built, but what hurt more than any of that were the people who believed the story. Business partners who'd known him for years suddenly treated him differently. Friends who disappeared when things got complicated. His own brother called to ask if it was true, if he'd really been that stupid. On the 5th day after the article, Robert's phone rang. It was Helen, the lawyer. "I'm calling to tell you I'm resigning from the case," she said, her voice tight. "My firm thinks it's best if we distance ourselves from this situation." "Helen, please. Lisa needs your help now more than ever." "I'm sorry, Robert. I have to think about my career." "I hope you understand." She hung up before he could respond. Robert stared at his phone, anger and disappointment burning through him. This was what happened when things got hard. People ran. People protected themselves. He'd done the same thing to his mother, and now he was seeing it from the other side. He drove to Lisa's apartment. She looked terrible when she opened the door. Her eyes were red and swollen. She'd clearly been crying for days. "You should go," she said before he could speak. "You shouldn't be seen here anymore. It just makes things worse. I'm not going anywhere." "Robert, you're losing everything because of me. Your business, your reputation, everything you worked for. I'm not worth that." He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "That's not your decision to make. Then whose decision is it?" Lisa's voice rose, frustration and pain spilling over. "Because from where I'm standing, I've destroyed your life. The best thing I ever did for you was cry on that bench, and the worst thing you ever did for me was stop to help." "You don't mean that, don't I? Look at what's happened. Look at what people are saying. They think I'm using you. They think you're some kind of predator. They're saying Sophie should be taken away from me. People are calling child services, did you know that? Anonymous tips about how I'm an unfit mother living off a rich man." Robert felt like he'd been punched. "They called CPS? A social worker came yesterday. She was nice about it, said it was just routine, but I could see the judgment in her eyes. She looked around this apartment, saw that we had food and clothes and a safe place to sleep. And I could tell she was thinking the same thing everyone else is thinking." Lisa collapsed onto the couch, her face in her hands. "This was supposed to be our chance to start over, to build something real. And now it's worse than before. At least when we were homeless, we were invisible. Now everyone's watching, waiting for me to prove them right." Robert sat down next to her. He didn't try to touch her or comfort her. He just sat there, letting her pain exist without trying to fix it. "I spent 5 years running from my guilt about my mother," he said finally. 5 years telling myself that if I worked hard enough, made enough money, did enough good things, maybe I could balance the scales. But guilt doesn't work like that. You can't pay it off like a debt." He looked at Lisa, really looked at her. "When I saw you on that bench, I thought helping you would fix something broken in me. I thought maybe if I saved you, I could forgive myself for not saving her. But that's not how this works either. You're not my redemption. You're just a person who needed help, and I was someone who could give it. So what do we do now?" Lisa asked quietly. "We stop hiding," Robert said. "We stop letting other people write our story. We tell them what really happened in our own words, and we let the chips fall where they may. And if they don't believe us, then at least we'll know we told the truth. That has to count for something." Lisa was quiet for a long time. Sophie was in her room, playing with toys that Robert had bought, living in an apartment Robert paid for, eating food Robert provided. Everything in their lives was connected to him now, and that terrified her. But running would mean going back to that bench, to that rain, to that moment when she had nothing left. and she'd already decided she couldn't go back there. "Okay," she said finally. "We tell the truth. But we do it my way. What's your way?" "We do it together. Not you rescuing me. Not me being grateful. We stand together and tell them this is what kindness looks like, even when it's messy and complicated and doesn't fit into their neat little boxes." Robert extended his hand to her. Not as a billionaire to someone he was helping, but as an equal. As someone who was just as scared and uncertain as she was, Lisa took his hand and shook it. "Partners?" "Partners," Robert agreed. Neither of them knew if it would work. Neither of them knew if the truth would be enough to overcome the story that had already been written. But they knew they couldn't win by running, and they couldn't survive by staying silent. The next morning, Robert called his publicist and told her to set up a press conference. Lisa called the reporter who'd started all of this and told him she'd give him an exclusive interview. They were going to fight back, not with lawyers or money or power, but with something simpler and more dangerous. They were going to fight back with the truth. The press conference was scheduled for Tuesday afternoon at a hotel downtown. Robert's team wanted to control everything, to script every word, but Lisa refused. If they were going to tell the truth, it had to be real. No polish, no corporate spin. Just two people talking about what happened. The night before, Lisa couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Sophie, about what this would mean for her daughter's future. Every news article would follow them. Every search of their names would bring up this story. Was she doing the right thing, or was she just making everything worse? At 2 a.m, she found Robert sitting in his car outside her building. She knocked on the window, startling him. "What are you doing here?" she asked as he rolled down the window. "I could ask you the same thing. I saw your car from the window." "Couldn't sleep either?" Robert shook his head. "Keep thinking about all the ways this could go wrong tomorrow." Lisa opened the passenger door and got in. They sat there in the dark, two people who'd become unlikely allies in a battle neither of them had wanted. "My mom used to say that the truth is like water," Robert said suddenly. "You can try to hold it back, build walls around it, but eventually it finds a way through." I never understood what she meant until now. "Do you think people will believe us?" "I think some will. Some won't, but at least we'll know we tried." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the empty streets. Finally, Lisa spoke again. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know something. You changed my life. Not because you gave me a place to stay or helped with the bills. You changed it because you saw me. When I was sitting on that bench, I felt invisible, like I'd disappeared from the world. And then you stopped. You actually stopped and saw me." Robert's voice was thick when he responded. "You changed mine too. I'd forgotten what it meant to just help someone without calculating the return, without thinking about what it would cost or what I'd get back. You reminded me that sometimes the right thing to do is just the right thing to do." The next afternoon, the hotel conference room was packed. Reporters filled every seat, cameras lined the back wall. The energy in the room felt hostile, like everyone had already decided what the story was and they were just here to watch it play out. Robert and Lisa walked in together. No assistants, no lawyers, just them. Lisa's hands were shaking, but she kept them folded in her lap where the cameras couldn't see. Robert spoke first. He told them about his mother, about her death, about the guilt he'd carried. His voice cracked when he talked about the phone calls he'd ignored, but he pushed through. Then he explained why he'd stopped that night in the rain, what he'd seen, what he'd felt. "I didn't help Lisa because I wanted good press or tax write-offs or because I had some ulterior motive," he said, looking directly at the cameras. "I helped her because my mother died alone and cold and I wasn't there. And when I saw Lisa and Sophie on that bench, I couldn't walk away. Not again." Then it was Lisa's turn. She was terrified, but she spoke clearly. She told them about her husband, about the cancer, about the bills that destroyed everything they'd built. She told them about losing her job, her home, her dignity. She told them about the night she couldn't afford Sophie's medicine, about feeling like she'd failed as a mother. "Robert didn't take advantage of me," she said firmly. "He gave me a chance when nobody else would. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't want anything. He just helped because he could and because it was the right thing to do. And if that makes me weak or makes him look bad, then I guess we live in a world where kindness is suspicious and helping people is wrong. The questions came fast after that. Reporters asking about the money, about their relationship, about whether this was all just a publicity stunt. Lisa and Robert answered honestly, sometimes fumbling for words, sometimes contradicting each other on small details. It wasn't smooth or polished, but it was real. One reporter stood up near the back. "Mr. Chung, your company's stock has dropped since this story broke. Your board has reportedly asked you to distance yourself from this situation. Why are you here instead?" Robert looked at Lisa before answering. "Because some things are more important than stock prices. I built my company by taking risks on what I believed in. Well, I believe in this. I believe in helping people who need it, even when it's complicated, even when it's messy. And if my board doesn't understand that, then maybe they're not the right board." The room went quiet. That quote would be in every headline, and Robert knew it. He just put his entire career on the line. After the press conference, they didn't know what to expect. The first few articles were skeptical, still questioning their story. But then something unexpected happened. People started coming forward. A nurse from Seattle General wrote an editorial about how she'd worked with Lisa, about what an excellent nurse she'd been, how devastating it was to watch her lose everything. Former neighbors confirmed the story about her husband's illness. The landlord who'd evicted her admitted in an interview that he'd felt terrible about it, that Lisa had tried everything to stay. Other people started sharing their own stories. Parents who'd been one medical bill away from homelessness. Families who'd lost everything despite doing everything right. The comment sections that had been so cruel before started filling with messages of support. Not everyone believed them, but enough people did to change the narrative. 3 weeks later, something else happened. Robert announced the creation of a new foundation. It would help families dealing with medical debt, providing emergency funds for prescriptions, connecting people with resources, helping them navigate the system that had failed Lisa so completely. "My mother's name was Dorothy," Robert told the small gathering at the foundation's launch. "She worked 3 jobs and died with nothing. This foundation is named after her, the Dorothy Chun Foundation, because she deserved better, and so do the thousands of families going through what Lisa went through." Lisa stood beside him as he spoke, no longer as someone he was helping, but as the foundation's first employee. Helen, the lawyer who'd abandoned them, had called to apologize and offered to work with them again. Lisa had politely declined and found someone else. The clinic where Lisa had been offered a job called back. They'd done their research, read the interviews, and decided they wanted her after all. She started the following Monday, back in scrubs, back to doing the work she loved. Sophie started back at preschool. The other parents were kind, or at least polite. Sophie didn't understand what had happened, only that they had a real home now and Mommy seemed happier, 6 months after that night in the rain. Lisa and Robert met for coffee at the same diner where this had all started. Sophie was at a birthday party, and Lisa had the afternoon free. "How's the foundation going?" Lisa asked. "We've helped 47 families so far. Got the medicine, helped negotiate payment plans, connected people with housing resources. It's not enough, but it's something. It's more than something." They talked about the future, about the plans for expanding the foundation, about Lisa's job at the clinic. Normal conversation between friends. The kind of ordinary moment that had seemed impossible 6 months ago. As they left the diner, Lisa looked up at the sky. Dark clouds were gathering. "Looks like rain," she said. "Do you need an umbrella?" Lisa smiled. "No, I'm not afraid of rain anymore." They walked to their cars, going their separate ways but connected by a story that had started with tears on a bench and ended with hope. Robert had learned that money couldn't fix everything, but sometimes simple human kindness could. Lisa had learned that accepting help wasn't weakness, and that sometimes strangers could become the family you needed. The Dorothy Chun Foundation grew over the years, helping thousands of families. Every person they helped was told the story of how it started. about a woman crying in the rain and a man who stopped when everyone else walked by. Sophie grew up knowing her mother was strong, that they'd been through hard times but came out the other side. She didn't remember living in a car or that desperate night when her medicine seemed out of reach. But she grew up watching her mother help others, watching Robert use his wealth for good. And she learned that kindness was never wasted. Years later, when people asked Robert about his greatest achievement, he never talked about his company or his wealth. He talked about a rainy night when he almost walked away but didn't, about how one small choice to care about a stranger had changed everything. And Lisa, when Sophie was old enough to understand, told her daughter about the night she thought she'd lost everything, about sitting in the rain with no hope left, about the man who stopped and saw her when she felt invisible. "The world can be cruel," Lisa told Sophie, "but it can also be kind. You just have to be brave enough to accept the kindness when it comes. Some stories don't have perfect endings, but this one had something better. It had a real one. Two broken people who found each other in the rain and learned that sometimes, when you stop to help someone else, you end up saving yourself too."